All right. We've been given a thumbs up. Hello, hello, hello. Oh, here it is. Testing, testing. I don't even hear myself. Hello, am I turned up? Can you hear me now? Hello? Yeah, okay, I got it. All right. Good to see you this morning. We're continuing our study on prayer. Thought I better take the little sucker out. So, Genesis 18 is where we're going to begin to look at. This is a very interesting interaction between Abraham and the Lord. This is the occasion when the promise is given to Abraham that he's going to be a father of many nations and have a child and all of this. And it's also the time in which Abraham finds out that God is on his way down to Sodom and Gomorrah. The angels, at least the destroying angels, I guess you could call them. They're going to check out Sodom and Gomorrah. And the interesting thing in all of this is, as you're familiar with, the negotiation that Abraham goes through with God on sparing the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. So I want us to look at that. What I plan to do is, there's lots of people in the Bible who pray, and we have the recorded prayers. There's a lot of them in the collection of Psalms. There's many that are in the Old Testament, Abraham being one that we're going to look at, and we're going to look at Nehemiah, and then Solomon has a prayer that's recorded. And so there's several things that we're going to try to, I guess, learn from and try to gain some insight in regard to improving our prayers. So we want to continue our focus on that. So Genesis 18, I'd like to start in Genesis 18 beginning in verse 1 to get the full context, because I think the setup to the event is a good one. And so let's start. Genesis 18 beginning in verse 1. This will be in the Bible. We on the sheet, we start in verse 16, but I'm backing up a little bit to get the focus. Now the Lord appeared to him, that is Abraham, by the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant. And they said, So do as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent, and Sarah, and said, Quickly prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes. Abraham also ran to the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. Then they said to him, Where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, There in the tent. He said, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing, and Sarah laughed to herself, saying, After I have become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? And the Lord said to Abraham, Why does Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I bear a child when I am so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord. At the appointed time, I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah denied it, however, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, No, but you did laugh. Now, we're going to begin in verse 16, which we have a section going into Abraham's negotiation with God as the Lord informs Abraham about what he's about to do. Now, there's some interesting things about the text here in preparation for this. Number one is Abraham is sitting there, and the Bible says 3 men appeared opposite him. Now, you could say, well, Abraham was, dozing off and asleep, and they had traveled and come, but the text seems to indicate that they appeared, and he looked, and he ran to them real quick. So it's interesting to think about, did Abraham recognize them at first as being heavenly beings, angelic beings, and so he's making haste to prepare a meal for these individuals? Or does that come a little later when he begins to recognize that these are not, normal individuals, that they're actually, heavenly beings, divine beings, if you please? What do you think? That was a question, by the way. Huh? Yeah, the text seems like it's an immediate thing that they appear, but what's Abraham's reaction? Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hebrews writer says, "Be not, don't neglect to entertain strangers."
Yeah,
And I think that's just a habit that Abraham had,
right.
hospitality.
Well, I mean, what are you going to? He's doing what good folks, people know to do. I don't think he's going to ask them, okay, you're divine beings, what do you eat?
I
uh,
think later on he realizes that they are divine beings
yeah,
because of what's said.
I think he comes to an understanding at first. Um, it says they appear before him, but he looked up and saw them. So I don't know if he recognized them as being divine beings at first, but he does come into an understanding of it. But they do appear opposite him, and he runs toward them. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. They came in bodily form. Yeah. Um, Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Well. Yeah, that's true. But that was the custom. The word Adonai doesn't necessarily mean I recognize you as a divine being. It means master, Lord. It's sort of like sir when we have in the New Testament when Jesus, when others would say Lord. It has a sort of double meaning depending on who you're addressing. So is it the Lord, or is it he's recognizing strangers and he's giving respect to them? It could be that. But it is a interesting thing. But from the standpoint of hospitality, that would be the thing. Any stranger that would come from the ancient Near East, that would be the sort of behavior that you recognize. In fact, not doing that would be quite shameful in that society.
It's fascinating to look at it too because it's a window into how strangers were treated on
Yeah.
a regular basis.
Yeah.
He just had to do it on the fly. You can see what was done.
Yeah. Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, it must be. All we have is what's there. So all of that in preparation, we know, the reader knows from the standpoint of the writer that this is unique. And but whether or not Abraham recognizes it, but he does eventually come, if he doesn't already, he comes to the understanding that he's been visited by some divine beings. In fact, when there's a how should I say it? There's a change in understanding of the Lord. It's kind of like in the New Testament, one could say "Sir" or "Lord" to someone, like Jesus, and not knowing, and then Lord takes on a different connotation when you understand who the individual is. So it's not just little L Lord; it becomes capital L Lord. Yes. Yeah, go ahead. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, 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 yeah.
In verse 2, where it says three men were standing opposite him. Off the top of your head, what's that word in the Hebrew then? Is it the same word Adam?
I don't know what's. Yeah, it's ish, which is a general term for man. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's one of the things of looking at Lord. Is it capital L at this point, or is it the little Lord of respect? But whatever position you want to take on it.
Verse 10, he knows.
But yeah, he comes to understand, and this is sort of the area that I want us to go into and look at, and how Abraham interacts with the Lord as he knows now. Okay, and is quite interesting. His the things that he says and the attitude that he has, what he knows about God. And the writer is telling you also that when the two go down, evidently the angels who've come in human form go down to destroy or check it out, and ultimately rain fire and brimstone upon the two cities. The Lord remains behind, and it said the Lord said. I mean, now we have a recognition in the writing that the Lord is there with Abraham. Now, some say that this is the Jesus before his pre-incarnation, but whatever it is, it's God who is now there talking with Abraham, which is kind of fascinating. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right. 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 Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
We need to be very specific, too, that I believe this is the pre-existent Christ, but the body of Jesus was not prepared until, his body was formed for him to come into the world. So
Mm-hmm.
this is the pre-existent Son of God, if you take my position, which is the correct position.
Yeah. We probably knew you would believe that, but okay. So let's get to now verse 16. That was an interesting discussion, wasn't it? Okay. Then the men rose up from there and looked down toward Sodom. And Abraham was walking with them to send them off. The Lord said, okay, now we have, it's not, sir, little L said. The writer is indicating here that the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? God's talking out loud here. It's kind of interesting. He says, since Abraham would certainly become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Shall I hide? Why would God say it that way? Isn't that kind of interesting?
I think it's something to encourage Abraham to sort of, buck up his spirits, I guess, just to give him some positive words of affirmation.
Yeah, might be. Anybody else? Yes. Do you have need? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. 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 It was the comment was about Jonah when God was talking to Jonah. Shall you be angry? About the plant or the gourd, and yet I have people in this city that can't tell the right hand from the left hand. So the idea of raising a question or talking like this is sort of, I think, and this is my opinion, which I know is right, is God's raising curiosity in the mind of Abraham. It's kind of like there's several times when God, where are you? When he says in the garden, when Adam and Eve are hidden. It causes them to think about where they are, and God has just announced that a year from now he's going to have a child. And so he's reiterating what he just said and promised, and Sarah laughed. Abraham does too, by the way. And God's raising, he's emphasizing that which he has already promised. And it's almost as if, where is Abraham in this? What's he thinking about this? It's almost as if it's God's way of bringing out, Abraham to talk, to see where he is, to affirm, to encourage. But just the way that it's asked is kind of interesting to me. Shall I hide from Abraham? And I'm sure what Abraham's going to say, well, what? Hide from what? What are you hiding from me? To me, it's kind of a question that a parent would talk to their child like, should I tell you what's going to happen? Or shall I tell you what we're going to do Saturday? Or something like that. See what I'm saying? Raising the curiosity in the mind of the individual. That's often done. So we have here God saying, shall I hide from Abraham what is about to do, since he, and God emphasizes that he's a very important, significant individual in God's plan and scheme of things. He says, and Abraham will certainly become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed. For I have chosen him so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. So he reiterates actually the conditions that are involved, and Abraham being in that special place, position that he's in. And the Lord said, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see whether they have done entirely as the outcry which has come to me indicates. And if not, I will know. This is interesting. How do you to understand this? Does God not know? What's all of this? You might want to say, what's all this act about? You see what I'm saying? Yeah, yeah. So, is just a way of creating an interesting story that critics would say, this is just storytelling at its best? Or is there, what is it on the part of God? What's God doing? Tell me, talk to me. Do you find this interesting, or is this kind of something you always read, never really thought about? I mean, God already knows, right? He's going to go down there and find out something that he already knows, or is there something else that's in the text? Maybe God is affording an opportunity to Abraham, because would not God know that who's in the place where he's about to destroy? Who's there? Lot, his nephew, right? Lot's there. Lot's wife, his 3 daughters. Is it 3, or am I thinking Noah? 2 daughters. And so here we have the scene, and God's, he's appeared, he's promised to Abraham and all this, and blessing upon him, but he's going down, and a couple of things to keep in mind maybe. Number one, if Abraham is going to be the father of the faithful, and Abraham is elevated to this position, what is his attitude toward family? Could he say, well, I know Lot's there, but, go ahead and wipe them out. I don't care. Or does this event show something about Abraham and the nature of his faith and his connectedness and what he feels and thinks, which I think it does. But also on the standpoint of God, God seems to be inviting conversation, inviting Abraham to think about the situation and maybe do something in talking with God that people wouldn't ordinarily do. If God has his way and he's going to do what he's going to do anyway, no matter what I say about it, then let God be God. That's the Calvinists, everything is determined. Whatever you say isn't going to change anything. Whatever you say does not impact God in any way. So why would I be motivated to pray if it's kind of like, I just want to hear the sound of your voice and you to pray to me, but really, I've made my decision. Do you see what I'm saying? So, is this a revelation to us that God is inviting us to talk to him, and even when Abraham starts to realize that they're going down to Sodom and Gomorrah, and that's where some family is. Now, why isn't he, he's concerned about his family. What's he going to say? Because that's where they live, and if they find out the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah is what it is, okay, I think that's just sort of a statement. It's not like they don't know, but it's inviting Abraham, and he's in a predicament, isn't he? And so God, as the angels go, they're in human form, the Lord remains behind with Abraham. Now think about this for a moment. The Lord lingers with Abraham as his destroying angels are on their way to Sodom and Gomorrah. So, let's continue here. Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Abraham approached. Now, I haven't looked at the Hebrew. Ross has the Hebrew here, but there's a phrase that's a colloquial phrase in Hebrew. Literally, it means to the faces of, or to my faces. And it's idiomatic to describe a face-to-face situation. That's where we get the word before or in the presence of in Hebrew. It's to the face of. So it's describing, when you're before something, you're face to face, right? So he's before the Lord. I don't know the distance between them. Okay, you got the picture in mind? Okay, he's before the Lord. That's to the face of. That's what the word means, the phrase. And so what does he do as they're going down? Now, he's thinking now about Lot. So what does he do? Before that, he approached the Lord. Okay, Hebrew is a visual language. And we are to see face to face, and then Abraham comes up. Let me ask you something. Okay, you see what I'm saying? It's approach. He approaches the Lord. Now they're already in close distance to each other, it would seem, but now he approaches the Lord. That's significant. That to me is, even though this is a situation in which the Lord and him are talking, sort of in the Lord miraculously has revealed himself, and they're having a conversation. The language that's involved is the language of prayer. So here we have Abraham who comes closer to the Lord, and so what's he doing? He's going to bend the Lord's ear for a minute.
You can see that with conversations between close friends.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they do. So, and the Lord doesn't go out. Here comes Abraham, and the Lord doesn't go, wait a minute. You're getting too close to me. You're in my personal divine space. God doesn't do that. He's there. Go ahead. Yeah, it sounds like it. Is that what you get out of it? Yeah. Well, that's what we're getting from this situation when we look at different people who pray in the Bible. Yeah, I think there's a long history of Catholicism. high church, low church mentality. You know what I mean by that? By high church, low church, what? What do I mean? Okay.
High church would be very structured. Everything
Structured, formal, all the way down to every action, every word. This is why with the Eucharist or whatever, the when it's done in Latin, it's high church. Okay. But then in other places, it may not be done, but done in English, in the vulgar language, that is the language of the people. High church usually revolves around those who are administering worship. You're just a spectator, really, to the high church emphasis. The songs, the drama. Low church would be more oriented, to a less formality. I mean, there'll be formal things, but it's less. And I think we have been influenced in many ways by that without knowing it. Not that we have embraced Catholicism and stuff. It's just like the unstated pastorate system, if we're not careful, we have, where the preacher becomes the pastor of the church, like in denominations, instead of having the preacher, the minister, and the elders, and things of that nature. We can, by just in culture, sort of think in terms of long-standing human ideas that have come down through history. Right? Am I wrong here? It's easy to slip into that. And for us to perceive certain things as being more important than others, and the way that we might do something would indicate more reverence or spirituality than something else. Now, there may be in a lot of things, of course, but we have to make sure. Jesus talks about, meaningless repetitions. Jesus talks about not praying to be heard or seen by men, to have the approval of men. Our name, most of the time, we have referred to the worship building as an auditorium to get away from the idea of what? Sanctuary. Okay? So there are things or impressions that we've grown up with and that, we have been a part of. And I think that relates to our involvement in prayer. When we look at prayer from several different people, as we'll see, there are some that are pretty formal. There are some that, like Hezekiah, is on his bed and he's facing the wall and he's bemoaning his illness, and that he was told to get things in order, and he's sitting there praying on his bed facing the wall for God to intervene, and God extended his life. You have those who bowed, then you had those who stood. You had, in other words, I'd have to say, because of the different postures that are seen in regard to prayer, there's not one posture that we have to do to be right in prayer. Does that make sense? Because all it takes is one to show, if I'm doing this, and let's say this is the only way, all it takes is, okay, what about this over here? That seems to contradict that. You got to be careful. You going to say something, Ross? Go ahead. Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. So what's casual and what's reverence? Is Abraham, can casual be reverent? Maybe I could ask it that way. Does Abraham lose his reverence in this? Is he acting, kind of flippantly in prayer? I don't think so. In fact, I think the way that he is because of his relationship with God. And there's some important ideas that come to the surface here, is that God is inviting Abraham. He's there. Okay, think about this. God is there. So what is a person going to do? This carries over, by the way, to our prayer life, because we're getting a picture of a real event that is illustrating to me what prayer is like. Components of prayer, aspects of prayer that maybe we haven't thought about. So let's continue for a minute. So Abraham approached him. Was Abraham, who approaches God? It's kind of like we've been taught so much about accuracy and truth. Okay, I'm coming from this standpoint of not being, struck by lightning, because God put a fence around Mount Sinai and said, "Don't come any closer, or you're going to die." Okay. Well, I understand in that situation. Okay, there's a law, but who went up to ascend Mount Sinai? Who went up? Moses did. And he spent how long on top of the mountain? Then he had to go back and, and this time he had to write do the tablets because he broke the original ones. So there are aspects of God's law and God's holiness and who he is, and it is a frightening thing to fall in the hands of a living God for the disobedient and for those who are outside of Christ and stuff, But it's not that, or at least there's something different that God is calling us to understand when we're his children, when we are his people. And in this situation, Abraham approached the Lord and said, now I want you to listen to his negotiation here. This is really clever on his part. When you think about it, as clever as a human being could be with God. Okay. Now, I say clever. God, he's not twisting God's arm or anything. He's not making God do something that God doesn't want to do. God's going to come down and he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And you can say everything you want to, but you're not going to dissuade me. You're wasting my time. You're wasting your time. Why talk? He says, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Think about this for a moment. What's the foundation of that question that Abraham's asking God? What does that reveal about Abraham and his understanding of God?
God is a God of justice, but also a God of mercy.
Now, at this point, we know Abraham is thinking about who? Lot and Lot's family, his family. And so what does he appeal to? The angels have gone down to see the outcry. They're going to destroy the city, What does he appeal to in regard to God? It reveals his understanding of God. He's appealing to God's justice, God's reputation, God's mercy. A lot of the prayers in the Old Testament, particularly Moses, to dissuade God, and it's always interesting, the interplay that we have. to get God to change his mind, or, to mitigate the threat of God's wrath in destroying the people of Israel. Sometimes, like Moses, will argue with God based upon, well, if you do this, then your reputation may not be very good among the nations. Don't you think that's interesting? It's funny. Yeah. It's not like God's allowing what? He invited, there was no person that he spoke face to face to like he did Moses. And God is about to wipe out Israel because of their disobedience. Moses comes, and what does he do? Wait a minute now. God was going to build his new plan through Moses' lineage. I'll raise you up. We'll get rid of everybody. We'll go with you now. What is that say? What is that doing? We read these stories and events, but they are theological. They're teaching something about our relationship with God, which on one level is missing if we're not careful in our prayers, in our relationship with God. How well do you know him? Well, Abraham is pleading with him because he knows God is just. And there's a righteous person down there. There's a person that, as righteous as can be. That's his argument. God could have said, well, Lot's sorry too. But he didn't. In fact, New Testament calls him righteous Lot. So he's trying to live like he ought to live in a place that's become very evil, filled with homosexuality. You can't explain that away as if the problem is hospitality. That's the most inane argument that's ever been made about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. They come to the house wanting to have sexual relations with the men who are there. The men come to the house. Now, what's another thing that's problematic is Lot says, don't do this, take my daughters. Yeah. They could have repented. Okay, now let's back up. This leads to a lot of interesting stuff. So, Abraham's going to appeal to God based upon what he understands some components of God's nature. He's going to use as leverage. Can I say that? Go ahead. Yeah.
So we're told now that we go to the judgment seat. When we pray, that we ask. Perhaps, maybe, he wanted Abraham to just ask.
Yeah. I think he's lingering. He's lingering to allow Abraham to have a relationship with him, to talk to him. To me, that's saying something about who God is. And so Abraham is going to leverage God's reputation. Now, I know you're not going to condemn the righteous with the wicked. Now, I know that about you, God. So, based upon that premise, then he starts negotiating. Because, you wonder why he starts with 50. Surely, out of all the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah, there would at least be 50 people. Okay, so he starts low, I think, on his part. Maybe he thinks it's a high number. I don't know. But 50 out of the population doesn't seem to be very many. So, but just in case, what does he do? He continues to negotiate. So he says, now I want you to follow along with God. This is humorous, folks. You can laugh at some things in the Bible because God is teaching through the humor. The writer is showing Abraham negotiating. Now, Abraham gets to a number and he stops. God saves Lot anyway because there wasn't 10 there. But he does save Lot. Now, he says, Abraham approached, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? That seems not to be your character, God, I think is the underlying idea. He says, suppose there are 50 righteous people within the city. Will you indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it? Now notice something else about Abraham's belief. He thinks that a city can be spared by the righteous people that are in it. Can you think of a passage that might corroborate that? Righteousness what? Exalts a nation. Sin is a reproach. Yeah. Okay. So we'll finish this up. Time, my, got away from me. So, okay.